gentlemen, welcome to the Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity's annual Ambassadors Roundtable. I am honored to introduce to you today our distinguished panelists who will discuss the timely topic of diplomacy and building a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. Firstly, our moderator today is Mr. Kim Myung-hee, a former 중앙일보 editor-at-large and the senior columnist of Security and Foreign Affairs. To his left is Ambassador of Canada, Eric Walsh, Ambassador of France, Fabien Panon, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, Cho Hyun, Ambassador of Japan, Yasumasa Nagamine, Ambassador of the European Union, Michael Reiterer, and Acting Ambassador of the United States of America, Mark Napper. Now, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Cho Hyun, will deliver his keynote address. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Vice Minister Cho to the podium.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, my colleague ambassadors. Kim Myung-hee 대기자님, it's an honor to speak to the panel which is presided by you. Well, I spent a white night last night, not because of this speech, but because of the soccer game. So please do understand, I am tired and my eyes are reddened. By the way, sometime yesterday, I had a brief encounter with my German colleague, German ambassador, and he was leaving for Seoul to join the Germans for a rally for the game. And I said to him, please be nice to us. And he responded to me, please be nice to us as well. That's what had happened yesterday. This morning, I want to talk about my personal observations on three different kinds of optimism. And then I will briefly talk about what to do or what is to be done. The first observation on the optimism. I attended as a Korean ambassador in Vienna, the first Chief of Missions Conference in 2013 in the previous government. At the time, there was a special lecture done by one of the senior advisors to the president on the North Korean issue. And he said that we shouldn't too much worry about North Korean nuclear issue because in 3 to 5 years' time, something will happen in North Korea. He insinuated a regime collapse, although I didn't check it out. I was flabbergasted. Maybe he might have more intelligence or information. At later stage, I heard something similar said by somebody else here and there in private conversations. And that kind of attitude actually set the tone of our policy toward North Korea. And on, but I will not dwell on it. This is, I believe, an optimistic view or wishful thinking. When I was sitting in the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympic Games in this past February, I was just thinking, what if? What if there had been no candlelight vigils and no early election in May? What if? There would be not the new president, but the outgoing president opening the game. And I was wondering if that was the case, would that be possible that North Korea was attending? I won't answer to my own questions, but miraculously, President Moon seized the opportunity and had the summit in April, paving the way for the summit between the United States and North Korea in June. My second observation on the optimism is this. Optimism, well, on the contrary, cynicism on optimism, criticism on optimism. There have been many, but what drew my attention was the column contributed by Michael Green to Jungang Daily before the summit in Singapore. The title of the column was, "History Does Not Favor the Optimists with North Korea." He argued that there is 40% chance of no meeting at all, another 40% chance that talks will break down, and 18% chance that the two leaders will actually pretend to get a breakthrough, and only 2% of chance that it will succeed. Well, as a diplomat and practitioner, I don't like numerical expressions, but more seriously, this argument was not convincing. But even after the summit in Singapore, such criticisms or cynicisms linger on. We hear even nowadays in the United States and in Korea similar views on the future of our talks. Well, I guess, and I hope they are healthy concerns. And I hope that they will transform into confidence. I really hope so. This leads me to my observation on this third point, my own optimism on the future of the process of achieving complete denuclearization and establishing permanent peace. Well, I claim that this is never a Panglossian view, Panglossian optimism grounded by Voltaire. On the contrary, this is a realistic view. Why? For a number of reasons. First, the Panmunjom Declaration and Singapore Statement were signed by the leaders for the first time. And particularly, the Singapore Statement reaffirmed the Panmunjom Declaration and its mentioning on the complete denuclearization in a stronger tone. Why? Because it specified North Korea. Accordingly, there is a strong linkage between Panmunjom Declaration and Singapore Statement, which is good. Secondly, we were able to observe a top-down approach, and the leaders are the driving force to overcome outstanding issues and talks, negotiations ahead of us. Some people also pointed out a good personal chemistry among the three leaders. And they are all at their early stage of the governance. In fact, there have been 2 previous South-North summits, and yet this is the first time this summit or the result of summit had been endorsed and supported by the United States. In short, I must say that there was an unprecedented breakthrough through bold top-level diplomacy. There could be more points for being optimistic, such as we have already entered into a virtuous circle. But I want to leave it to our esteemed panelists. And let me move on to the next issue, that what is to be done, what we should do. Well, although I was provided with some talking points from my colleagues in the ministry, this is absolutely my personal view. So, my dear ambassadors, please do not report back to your capitals. It's my personal view. First, every nation will continue to foster the moment for peace. Countries concerned will focus on implementing Panmunjom Declaration and the Singapore Statement. To that end, the follow-up meetings or follow-up negotiations for denuclearization between the United States and North Korea will continue. We will also take steps toward a peace regime. I know that we cannot achieve them overnight. It will be also not easy, difficult. But I believe it is worth taking. As for other interested parties, you will render your support. I count on your continued support. Secondly, we will agree upon the prioritization of all the issues. Achieving complete denuclearization and establishing permanent peace cannot be preceded by any other issues. Well, I believe each country has some other keen interested issues, but I hope we will have time to raise them in due course. This leads me to share the discussions I observed yesterday at the panel on the Peace and Development Cooperation Nexus. There was an emerging consensus that there is a strong linkage between security and development cooperation, and North Korea cannot be an exception. Well, peace is the precondition, no doubt about that, and sanctions should continue. And yet, we have to be prepared for development cooperation as well, because these are mutually reinforcing forces. Nevertheless, I said at the end of our discussion that we have to be careful. As a cautious diplomat, I said that we prepare, but we will get involved only when conditions are ripe. So I just reiterated what I've said for what should be done. Sorry, but with your indulgence, let me repeat myself and emphasize what I've been thinking about. I'd like to say that mutual trust, concerted efforts, and patience are the three key elements to save us from any possible danger of shipwreck in the course of our future negotiations. Confidence building is a painstaking process, so we better speed up, but we better not rush. While not holding back and doing everything we can, we need to have patience about upcoming results. When I say we, I don't just mean the two Koreas and the United States. I mean all members of the international community. A lasting, sustainable peace is, well, on the Korean Peninsula, is a common good not for this region, but for all around the world. And as you well know, common goods can be provided and maintained only when all members of the community do their own part and take responsibility. Against this backdrop, again, I count on your continued support to the peace-building process of the Korean Peninsula. I look forward to your discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Minister, for your most enlightening and timely speech. Now, without further ado, I turn the floor over to our esteemed moderator, Mr. Kim Young-hee.
Thank you very much. I'm Young-hee Kim, moderating this session. And thank you, Minister Cho, for your most insightful speech. And I'm personally glad that I find a fellow optimist on the stage, because what we need today is solid optimism. If you are a pessimist with the belief that North Korea will never give up its nuclear programs, what can you do? Where do you go? So some historian, whose name I forget, said that optimists are always wrong, but history is made by the optimists. So why don't we be optimists, at least until we see what the outcome of the ongoing series of summits we see. I myself saw some something as unbelievable as Singapore summit last night in Kazan, Russia. You know what I'm talking about. What happened in Kazan, I think, implies that nothing is fixed. 99% of observers or pundits predict that Korean soccer team will lose to Germany, the number one team, defending champion, something like 1-3 or 2-0, but it came out the other way. So nothing is fixed. And in this session, I want you ambassadors to come out with your ideas, advices, insights on how to facilitate this ongoing peace process. The key word is the peace, based on, of course, denuclearization of Korea. I would start with a question first to Minister Cho, and then to Ambassador Nepper. First, Minister Cho, when are we going to have the declaration of the end of war? When and where? It was mentioned in Panmunjom, and the two Koreas have actually declared that the war is over. When will it happen multinationally? where?
Well, my answer to that particular question is that it's anybody's guess. It all depends on the situation as we see. And I understand my government has been endeavoring for achieving the early conclusion of this issue, but there's nobody who can make a statement on the time frame of this issue. I don't deal with this issue, but that's the guaranteed answer, I must say. Thank you.
Yes, you are very cautious, like a good diplomat that you are. Ambassador Nepper, I want you to de-puzzle a puzzle. Okay? What made Kim Jong-un to make the turnaround so suddenly? As we know, as of last year, there was specter of war roaming around the peninsula, and the U.S. strikes of North Korea's missile nuclear tests seemed imminent. Then came the sudden change. Why? This is relevant to what will come out of this whole process.
Well, thank you. I think I agree. I think that is one of the most important questions which we need to understand. And frankly, I don't think any of us truly know what's in Chairman Kim's heart, except Chairman Kim himself. But I would suggest, and at the risk of oversimplifying, I think there's two answers to that question, two potential answers. One is that he made this decision to turn around based on a very tactical, short-term desire to ease pressure on his country, to ease sanctions, to strengthen his international standing, to increase his domestic legitimacy. But in the end, really, it's a cynical choice in which he has no real intent to proceed down the path towards denuclearization. The other, again, oversimplified answer, I think, is the more optimistic one, that he has made a fundamental and strategic decision to turn away from provocation, to turn away from isolation, to turn away from confrontation, and instead to turn towards the embrace of the international community, to turn towards the will of the international community to denuclearize, to lower tensions, to end his nuclear and missile programs. And certainly, I think that's the answer that we believe, that we want to believe, that he's undertaken, that he has made a strategic decision. And that's the reason why I think President Trump made the bold decision to meet with President Kim in Singapore to test this proposition, to see that if Chairman Kim has indeed made this fundamental choice to return to the fold of the international community. And it's a proposition that we're going to test in the days and weeks ahead to ensure that we have the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Is Kim Jong-un, in your view, negotiating in good faith?
I think at this point we have no reason to think otherwise. I think we've seen some positive steps from North Korea. The decision to destroy the Punggye-ri nuclear test site, the pledge to destroy the missile engine testing facility, the agreement to return the remains of U.S. servicemen lost or missing during the Korean War. These are all very positive steps. The decision to return the 3 American detainees, again, a very positive step. But we have to continue to test and push forward, and we will do this in the weeks ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So far, this was sort of introduction, and I would like to ask the other 4 ambassadors to deliver their kickoff remarks of no longer than 5 minutes. Would you, Ambassador Reiter, start first?
Well, thank you very much. Perhaps let me also start with a personal observation. When I started to come to Korea, it was in the year 2000. Korea was hosting the ASEM Summit, Asia-Europe Meeting Summit, and President Kim Dae-jung just was nominated for the Peace Nobel Prize. And I met him at the time with the Commission President, Mr. Prodi, and we all thought that was the solution to the problem. Now, 18 years later, I'm back in a different role, but we are discussing again the solution. And I think, again, I have the same feeling. It's optimistic. So I hope this time the optimism will translate into reality and will become sustainable. And I agree with Mark. I think the signs are more promising than we had. But on the other hand, I think it's very clear that we are at the beginning of a process. So what we have seen from the outset is the strong leadership by President Moon, and we have congratulated him on behalf of the European Union several times to his leadership, and we are convinced that everything which was done in the run-up to the first summit and the following summits, that was the ground base. And I think this is something we have to work hard to preserve. I also agree what you said, that it is a good sign that the Panmunjom Declaration, as well as the joint statement between the US and North Korea, refer to the complete denuclearization. I think this is an important link. And we should also have in mind that the ultimate goal, which is shared by the entire international community, as also expressed by the United Nations Security Council, remains the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But I think the mentioning of that goal in these two important documents, I think, are a strong indication that this can be realized. And it also is a confirmation of what the European Union has consistently advocated, that diplomacy is the only way forward towards lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. And therefore we hope that a process is unfolding which will lead to negotiations with the result of the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. From the point of view of the European Union, we had what we call critical engagement as a policy for many years. So we don't have to change gear. We have always said there has to be pressure, but on the other side, the lines of communication have to be open because pressure in itself is not a goal. We know from experience within the European Union and in our neighborhood, but also when we got engaged well beyond our neighborhood, that the diplomatic track is very often challenging, but it is always rewarding. There will be ups and downs in the process, which will need perseverance, cool blood, and leadership. And as stated, I think, by all the players, the summits were not an end in itself, but it will be necessary that the international community will stand by that process, especially when we begin with denuclearization, which is especially verification, inspection, reporting, key elements in that process. And here, I think I can confirm that the European Union is a strong supporter of the international non-proliferation regime, including the roles of the International Atomic Agency in Vienna and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. Having said that, the European Union is ready to facilitate and support the follow-up negotiations and other steps aimed at building confidence and trust and ensuring a long-lasting peace and security and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula. I think the workshop you referred to yesterday about this nexus between development and security, I think is an important one, because at the end of the day, we will have peace and security if we have prosperity on the whole Korean peninsula. In recent months, we have seen that the multilateral system has been undermined by rather unlikely sources. But nevertheless, the European Union remains fully committed to a rules-based international order with the United Nations as its core. Therefore, the conclusions which were adopted by all European foreign ministers in a council meeting on May 28th, a few days ago, the EU confirmed its commitment to work towards enhancing security in and with Asia. Furthermore, the foreign ministers have again expressed support for multilateralism 3 days ago. The EU highlighted how, in today's volatile and unpredictable world, multilateralism remains not only valid, but needs strong support. And therefore, a decision was taken that it will be a priority of the European Union during the United Nations General Assembly to make clear the strong commitment to multilateralism and to translate it into a proactive multilateral agenda. Therefore, we will focus on peace and conflict prevention, a common positive agenda with the promotion and protection of human rights at the heart of multilateralism, as well as an expanding global engagement on issues such as climate change, environmental protection, migration, counterterrorism, and the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And that brings me back in the specific context of peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and the region, as the EU believes that in the same way as the international community came together to apply maximum pressure on North Korea through UN and autonomous sanctions, lasting peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula can only be found through collective efforts of the international community and collective instruments. Therefore, we will keep the deliberations and consultations up with key allies, including Korea, to explore possible ways for the European Union to support and facilitate this peace process, drawing on our own experience in order to make, and this time, peace irreversible. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kim. And I listened to Vice Minister Cho's statement earlier, and then you have red eye this morning. And I congratulate the Korean team for the last night game. And perhaps tomorrow morning, I should have equally red eyes for the games the Japanese team will take part tonight. Well, because the time is limited, I would get into the subject matter. First, I'd like to congratulate and pay tribute to South Korean government for its tireless efforts in conducting serious dialogue with North Korea by your president 2 times, and then building a bridge between the United States and the DPRK, which led to the Singapore summit on June 12, under the very strong leadership of President Moon Jae-in, and your foreign minister also very, very instrumental for coordinating among us. Secondly, we value highly the very strong leadership and the persistent efforts made by President Trump and the Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, who brought historic summit in Singapore on June 12 for comprehensive solution of various issues regarding North Korea. In this connection, we appreciate very much for President Moon and President Trump both having taken up the abduction issue to Chairman Kim Jong-un in their direct talks. And thirdly, we find it very, very essential that the DPRK should take concrete action through negotiations. The follow-on negotiation will be expected between the United States and North Korea soon, and we should bring a action by DPRK North Korea through that process. And Japan will fully cooperate with the United States for its efforts to this end. Certainly, as President Trump said, the process has just begun. This is the beginning of a process. As Mikhail told, the process of denuclearization is a complex path, and we should go through the path for complete denuclearization. I'd like to share with you two aspects in my observation. First, on UN sanctions, and secondly, on security guarantee. First, UN sanctions. Already previous speakers put forward already Japan and the United States and ROK have repeatedly confirmed that these parties share as very solid principles to pursue the complete implementation of the UN Security Council resolutions on DPRK. I'd like to take note of the fact that these resolutions stipulate that the so-called CVID of the weapons of mass destruction and dismantling of ballistic missiles are included, and this implementation has to be done. Secondly, I'd like to draw your attention to President Trump's reference that the sanctions should only be lifted when it is confirmed that North Korea's nuclear is not a problem anymore. If nothing changes, the sanctions will remain there. We will continue to pursue complete and effective implementation of the resolutions of the UN Security Council regarding DPRK. Last night, Foreign Minister Khan, in her speech at the dinner, confirmed this point clearly. And on the security guarantee, in the joint statement in Singapore, from the joint statement, we understand that the United States will initiate the process for providing security guarantee for the DPRK while verifying DPRK's concrete actions towards denuclearization. We understand that the DPRK has yet to be provided security guarantees. This issue, the security guarantee issue, is closely related to the Japan and also regional security issues. Therefore, we very much like to continue to work closely with the United States and the ROK. And having said that, if I can allow just 1 minute, talking about Japan's basic position on the North Korea. Perhaps as you remember, back in 2002, September 17, the then Prime Minister Koizumi of Japan visited Pyongyang and held a meeting with the late Chairman Kim Jong-il. And then a joint statement document was issued. This is called the Pyongyang Declaration. And Japan's position, current position, is in accordance with the spirit and the basic principles of that document, Pyongyang Declaration, we are always ready to come back to that position, and in which the abduction issue, nuclear and missile issues should be comprehensively resolved and settle unfortunate past between Japan and North Korea, and aim at the normalization between Japan and North Korea. That has been laid down in the 2002 declaration, which has been reconfirmed in the 2005 September 19 six-party talks joint statement as well. So Japan's position is unchanged. We are ready to come back to all the principles agreed at that time between Japan and North Korea. So regarding a bilateral summit between Japan and North Korea, it is essential for such a summit to take place, but it has to be contribute to comprehensive solution for nuclear programs, threat of ballistic missiles, and abduction issues. So government of Japan has communicated with the DPRK through various channels until now, yet nothing has been decided on this possible summit. Regarding abduction issue, while receiving strong support from the President Trump and the government of Japan has a strong resolve to directly deal with this matter with the DPRK, and this is the already stated from the Japanese government on this issue. So this is the summary of what the Japanese government is stand for at this moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Nagamine. And Ambassador Pennon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Let me begin my presentation by thanking the organizers for inviting me to this roundtable. It is actually my first visit to Jeju, and I have seen amazing sights here in Jeju Island. And as far as soccer is concerned, we are crossing fingers for the time being. The current situation in the Korean Peninsula is probably one of the most important diplomatic issues for the time being. The recent diplomatic moves have led to a decrease of tensions, which is a real achievement for the time being. They have also enabled the launch of a process towards a complete denuclearization of the peninsula. France is obviously supporting President Moon Jae-in's efforts to lower the level of tension in the peninsula. The inter-Korean dialogue, relaunched during the Pyeongchang Olympics, is now developing in various fields after Panmunjom summit. And President Moon Jae-in's role as a broker, if I may say, between Washington and Pyongyang is also very central to start and encourage the discussions on denuclearization. As a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and a guarantor of the non-proliferation regime, France is directly concerned by the North Korean nuclear and ballistic threats. As you know, as we know, the North Korean threat is not only a regional one, but a global one. So everybody is concerned. The whole community should closely look at the evolution of the situation. This is why France has supported the strengthening of UN sanctions as well as of EU sanctions to bring the North Korean regime to the negotiating table. And let me tell you that as a diplomat, I can say that sanctions have been the best antidote to war. They were not an end in themselves, but a means to incite the North Korean regime to accept a credible resumption of discussions. And we should really value sanctions as a diplomatic tool. The Singapore summit was, as it was mentioned before, a significant step. It is a starting point for a process which must lead to the complete, irreversible, and verifiable denuclearization, CVID, of North Korea. And as we know, the road is still very long. North Korea must undertake strong and concrete measures towards this goal, and we need to remain vigilant. The recent actions undertaken by the North Korean regime go in the right direction. Let me just quote the suspension of nuclear tests and ballistic missile tests, as well as the closure of Punggye-ri nuclear test facilities, even if we wish this closure had been verified by experts. It can be seen as a prelude, but we need, as we all said, a CVID process. We need a precise roadmap and a calendar. We also need to tackle, as my Japanese colleague mentioned, the missiles and chemical weapons issues. We hope that the technical discussions between Americans and North Koreans will lead quickly to concrete achievements regarding denuclearization. And France is obviously, once again, supporting these coming negotiations, as well as the further development of inter-Korean dialogue. It is therefore crucial in this context that the international community keeps the negotiations on the right track. A verified denuclearization of North Korea is the prerequisite before lifting the sanctions for this very reason. And if I may say, to conclude, the building of a credible peace regime on the peninsula will be possible thanks to those tangible progresses on the nuclear issue. And France will support and continue with our European colleagues as well as other members of the international community to support this progress. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. I'd also like to refer to the miracle in Kazan yesterday, and it reminded me of a time not so long ago in Pyeongchang when in the semifinals of the hockey tournament, the German team unexpectedly beat the favored Canadian team, and the German Foreign Ministry tweeted out a travel advisory to its citizens in Canada saying, please don't gloat, please offer hugs and hot chocolate. Imagine if the Canadians had beat us at soccer. So I would like to encourage all Canadians to hug a German today, and perhaps all Koreans to join in that sentiment. But it does show that we should all be optimistic, because anything is possible. And even back on that day, that dark day for Canadians in February, nobody could have imagined that we would have this amazing scene only 2.5 months later. So I think you'll find a panel of optimists today, Mr. Kim. We're very encouraged by the steps taken by North Korea so far this year, particularly the reaffirmed commitment to complete denuclearization made both at Panmunjom and again in Singapore. And President Moon's role obviously has been key in that process. We remain hopeful that a subsequent dialogue will move towards an agreement with a timeline for complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement of North Korea's WMD and ballistic missile programs, and until then, we believe the global sanctions regime must remain in place. But we're ready to contribute to the implementation of a dismantlement process, a verification regime that such a process will require, and we will look for opportunities to introduce confidence-building measures that will create conditions conducive to further dialogue. We believe the ball is really in North Korea's court to make good on its commitments, and that the words that we've seen must be backed up by actions. In January this year, if we talk about some diplomatic initiatives and how countries that maybe aren't directly involved can try to contribute, Canada hosted the Vancouver Foreign Ministers meeting on security and stability on the Korean Peninsula, and 20 countries participated. We wanted to engage with allies and partners in support of international concerted action against North Korea's dangerous and illegal actions. It was a bit of a different time back in January still. But we also wanted to work together to strengthen diplomatic efforts and explore new options towards a peaceful, prosperous, and denuclearized peninsula. And this year, Canada has also used its G7 presidency to advocate for a diplomatic solution, an approach that supports dialogue while maintaining pressure. And as the G7 leaders indicated at the Charlevoix summit earlier this month, the situation on the Korean Peninsula is not just a regional issue, but it's a question of international peace and security. And the G7 agreed that we must continue to call on North Korea to take concrete steps towards CVID, and that in the meantime we must maintain the pressure, including through sanctions. In that respect, Canada has also advocated for the implementation of the UN sanctions as they exist, and we've even committed some funds, $3.25 million, to strengthen the capacity of countries that are willing but unable for their own domestic purposes to implement sanctions effectively, to offer training and advice. And we're participating in a multinational initiative to counter North Korea's maritime smuggling, in particular the ship-to-ship transfers, which contravene UN resolutions, and that includes the deployment in the region of a Canadian Forces maritime patrol aircraft. And Canada's steadfast commitment to the United Nations Command will soon be increasing. A Canadian, Lieutenant General Wayne D. Eyre, has been named the Deputy Commander of the United Nations Command. It's the first time ever that this position will not be staffed by an American. And the overall number of Canadian personnel assigned to UNC, which has many roles nowadays in monitoring the armistice and could play significant roles in the process of peace, will increase from 6 to 15 starting this summer. And we continue to talk bilaterally with North Korea. Canada maintains diplomatic relations with North Korea, although not at the ambassador level, and it's restricted thematically to certain areas. But these helped us in the resolution of a long-standing consular case last year, and we believe this kind of communication can support international efforts. And we also provide humanitarian assistance to North Korea through experienced partners like UNICEF and the World Food Program. And these ties allow for limited technical and academic exchanges, again, with a view to contributing to a brighter future for the North Korean people. But to the same end, Canada remains outspoken about systematic human rights abuses in North Korea, and we've called on Pyongyang, both directly and in multilateral fora, to address these alongside the denuclearization issue, and we continue to support resolutions on North Korean human rights at the UN General Assembly and the Human Rights Council. All of these measures are with a view to encouraging meaningful change in North Korea, and we must observe these good faith efforts by North Korea, and we must remain sufficiently involved to know that these efforts are part of a genuine shift and not part of anything else. Maybe I'll just conclude by offering a couple of things Canada's looking at as we go forward. Obviously, there's two tracks. There's the inter-Korean track and there's the denuclearization track. And as we've heard in a lot of panels already, the question of how to combine those or keep them separate, I think, is a very good one. And that's something that I think needs to be discussed and addressed to be most effective. The question of human rights and how, can there be a sustainable peace and stability on the peninsula without addressing human rights? I personally think that would be difficult. But obviously there's other considerations at play, and I think that question of how human rights gets folded in and when is something that needs to be looked at. I mean, there's the saying, the perfect is the enemy of the good, but we have to make sure that the good is good enough. And there's a line somewhere, and smarter people than me hopefully will find where it is. And then the question of denuclearization, and I know that Secretary Pompeo just yesterday mentioned that there are specific details that are emerging, but the question of the definition of denuclearization, what does that mean, the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula? Is there a common understanding of that? Hopefully there is, and I'm assured that there is. And the question of timing for progress. If we don't have specific milestones about when things will get done, how can we judge whether we're reaching them and whether we're succeeding? So those are the kinds of things that Canada will be looking at and happy to contribute to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Walsh. Ambassador Nepper, you have already made your points in response to my questions, but I still ask you to make your opening remarks no longer than 5 minutes.
Okay, I can do that. One of the advantages of going last on a panel like this is I'm allowed the luxury of saying I agree with everything my colleagues have said. But I would ask that if any tweets come in while I'm speaking that are related to North Korea policy, please let me know right away, and I'll adjust my remarks. But as I was reflecting on my presentation today, I was thinking about this time last year when we had convened here at the Jeju Forum. In the months ahead, we were to see another nuclear test, another ICBM test, multiple shorter-range missile launches. There was going to be a shooting at the DMZ. And frankly, all of these provocations, all of these tensions were entirely predictable, given the track that we were on at the time. But what we couldn't predict was the Peace Olympics. What we couldn't predict was North Korea's participation therein. What we couldn't have predicted was 2 North-South summits, and of course a U.S.-North Korea summit in Singapore. And so while we will not know, do not know, maybe never will know what is in Kim Jong-un's heart and what led him to make the decisions he has so far, what we can know are a couple things. One is that we wouldn't be here today in the situation we find ourselves without President Moon's very strong leadership, without President Moon's vision. I think we owe a lot to the very clear course that he has set, frankly, since his swearing in last May, through his declaration in Germany, and so on and so forth. And I think really he's owed a lot of credit for the progress we've made. But I think also the really strong relationship he's built with President Trump and President Trump's own willingness to pursue this opening with the North and to work very closely with President Moon to try and achieve, of course, the complete denuclearization of North Korea. But I would point to the Singapore summit, the joint declaration, because contained therein is not just the North's commitment to complete denuclearization, but several other things. One is a pledge to improve relations between the United States and North Korea. Another is a pledge to create a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. And then, of course, we had the pledge to return the remains of U.S. and other soldiers, United Nations Command soldiers, lost during the Korean conflict. And so where we find ourselves now is a process to explore all of these different areas and push forward. And they're all intertwined. We cannot have an improvement in North-South relations without denuclearization. Clearly, we cannot have the kind of bright and positive relationship between the U.S. and North Korea without complete denuclearization. And as President Trump has said, as Secretary Pompeo has said, we do foresee and we do truly believe in a bright future for North Korea and its people. We foresee a future in which there's trade and assistance and technical aid and investment. All of these things, positive things, will accrue once we are able to achieve the complete denuclearization of North Korea. Once we have complete denuclearization, we envision lifting sanctions, we envision improving relations, we envision really a brighter and more positive future for the North. And of course, getting there requires the cooperation and good coordination of the international community, of everyone represented on this stage today, but multiple other countries. This is a joint, a global effort to do this. And of course, part of that effort is maintaining the UN Security Council sanctions that are currently imposed on the North. As we've heard, not just from President Trump, Secretary Pompeo, but also South Korea's leadership and the leaders of many other countries, there cannot be any sanctions relief until we have complete denuclearization. I was asked earlier just what sort of, do we have any reason to doubt the North's intentions at this point? And of course, they have done several positive things, releasing U.S. detainees, but also continuing their moratorium on nuclear and missile tests. We haven't seen a major provocation since late September last year. And that will continue, we hope. In the meantime, President Trump, of course, at his press conference in Singapore, announced the suspension of major military exercises here on the peninsula. And we'll follow through with that in close coordination with South Korea and others. But I would make the point that this suspension is not irreversible. Should the circumstances change, should we have cause to believe that we are not making the kind of progress we hope to see with North Korea, we can easily restart these exercises. But I think we are willing to give the North a chance. We are giving the North a chance, and we want to see where this goes. I think since I was given a few minutes earlier, I'll end my remarks there, and we can take it to the next place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nepper. But stay there. Another big surprise in this whole Singapore drama was 3 summit meetings between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un before and after Singapore. Ambassador Nepper, from your vantage point, what's the story behind this new development of friendly rapport between the 2 countries? The relationships were not so friendly as of Singapore.
Well, there are those who are much more expert on China than I am. But I would just say, I think any and all contact that North Korea and its leadership have with the outside world is a good thing. I think that given China's very strong position so far on the need for North Korea's denuclearization, that it's very useful for Kim Jong-un to hear directly from Xi Jinping about the need for North Korea to respond to the will of the international community, to respond to the will of the UN Security Council, of which China is a permanent member, and to take steps to lower tensions in the region, which of course are in China's interest. But in terms of the content of their 3 meetings, in terms of what is motivating the Chinese to do what they're doing, I can't presume to speak on their behalf. But I think that the more, again, as I said, the more that Kim Jong-un, the more that his wife, the more that his sister go overseas and see the kind of things that can happen when a country trades and receives assistance and coordinates and cooperates with the rest of the outside world, I think it's a good thing.
Mr. Cho, you must have done much thinking about this.
Well, I agree with what Mark has just said, that it's better to have more exposure on the part of North Korea. And we have to send a coherent message to North Korea through various means. And having another channel or insurance policy, if you say, is good for having confidence in Kim Jong-un. If I may talk a little bit about what had been said earlier on sanctions.
Yes.
Indeed, it's a very sensitive issue. And the basic position of the Korean government's on this sanction was well delineated by my boss, Foreign Minister Kang, yesterday. So I will not go beyond the framework of Foreign Minister's statement, but let's think about it. What's the purpose of emphasizing the sanction or implementing the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council? I think one of the reasons is that we do not send the wrong message to North Korea, as if everything is done. Now you forget about your obligations or commitment. That's wrong. Sanction is not for sanctions per se. So while sanctions are implemented, I think we should prepare for the next phase.
Yes.
And we might be thinking about a temporarily coexisting phase of North Korea's full implementation of denuclearization process and the beginning of some lifting sanctions. I don't know how. The devil is in details. On the issue of human rights and abduction issues, I alluded that there should be a prioritization, but I didn't mention the keen interests of other parties. Well, I do recognize the importance of these issues, but I think we should think about the prioritization. We cannot start our negotiations or talks with North Korea with these issues. At the end of the day, we will have to work very closely to bring all the issues on the table in a coherent manner. Thank you.
Ambassador Nagamine, the same about this human rights issue may hold true with the abduction issue in Japan. I have two questions to you. Is abduction issue priority over denuclearization? That's question number one. Question number two, as you may recall, President Nixon visited China in 1971, and just 1 year after, Japan normalized relations between China, whereas United States normalized its relations with China in 1979. Is it possible that Japan this time too normalize relations with North Korea ahead of the United States?
Well, thank you. Well, I will briefly answer to your two questions. The first question, as I explained in my earlier intervention, for Japan, the resolution of nuclear, missile, abduction, those three are, well, I don't want to say preconditions, but these are the issues that we need to resolve.
Okay.
And then we will enter into the serious negotiation for normalization process. And then the Pyongyang Declaration clearly said, well, more in detail, what's going to... No. Pyongyang Declaration 2002, which I referred to earlier, which rather in detail put forward of the economic assistance to North Korea after normalization. So those are the kind of the agendas already kind of identified between Japan and North Korea back in 2002. This is the basic position which Japan will come back to, in this process. So we don't say that which is number one, which is number two. So the prioritization may be the issue of the way of kind of negotiation. So, well, to some extent, it's a tactical issue, which agenda to be presented, discussed at what stage. And this is something that perhaps the negotiating party may keep it close to the chest, perhaps. The second issue of normalization, which I already covered, the normalization will come. Certainly, we are ready to get into the process of normalization once those three issues are resolved. So I don't know how fast it would come as compared to the United States, which is subject to many factors. But anyway, the kind of sequence of things are already laid down as early as 2002, and we stick to that point.
Focus of my question was whether you could normalize relations before the United States.
Oh, well, I thought I touched upon that. So it is a relative question, and a number of circumstances will come into play. So it is hard to predict the kind of sequences of events at this time.
Ambassador Nepal, would you be unhappy if Japan make that choice?
I hate to sort of respond to hypothetical questions like that. Suffice to say, all of us are going to coordinate very closely on this going forward. I think that one of the benefits of having these very close relationships among ourselves, South Korea, the United States, the European Union, Japan, is that we are in close contact, everyday contact on this. And so really it's the process going forward, I think, is going to be very organic, and we're going to be in close touch, and whether who does what first or second or third, I think it's impossible to say at this point.
Mm-hmm. What is the Korean government position on this? The sequence of normalization of relationships.
Well, let 100 flowers bloom. The sooner the better, whichever.
Thank you very much. EU, France, and Canada have the benefit of distance, and you may see better than Korea, Japan, and the United States. You can see the forest, wood, instead of individual trees. In this regard, what role can you play to facilitate the peace process based on denuclearization of North Korea? Who will start? Okay.
First of all, let me tell you that we are not so far from the region, because France is part from the region. In the Pacific, we are part of our territories.
Oh, yes.
So we are directly concerned by what is going on in this region as a regional actor. Second, this is obviously a question for the whole international community, because as I said before in my statement, the questions we have to tackle, non-proliferation issues, this is the future, the security of the whole world. So the future of the non-proliferation regime is at stake. This is why for every country in the world, we have to be directly involved in those negotiations. Obviously, you need leaders to negotiate, to break the agreement. But I think this is a global responsibility, and that's what France has always advocated.
Mm-hmm.
As we also have specific responsibility as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, we also want to be sure that what has been decided by the international community will be fully abided by the countries who decided the sanctions, who decided the path, who set the objectives. And if you allow me, what about the role we could have? The role we could have is first, as it was said before, to encourage all actors to have a coherent vision of the questions to be tackled, because these are such complex issues. This is most probably the most difficult issues regarding non-proliferation to tackle, because you don't have only to tackle WMD issues, but also ballistic issues, long, short-term range missiles. So it will need a global effort by the whole international community to tackle all those questions. And I think the coherence between the actors will be of the utmost importance. Thank you.
Please. 2 minutes.
Yes, no, I can hopefully do it shorter than that. I certainly agree. I mean, the question is a question of international peace and security, and while obviously for Korea there's a lot at stake here, there's also other countries not anywhere near the region that are watching very closely the process with North Korea, and if we relax on some of our demands, if we start saying that actually it's okay if North Korea maybe fudges a little bit, then there's other countries around in other parts of the world, other hotspots, that are going to say, okay, so now that's the new global norm, and we don't want to be relaxing that just without really thinking through the consequences. And, you know, I get that a lot. You know, Canada's kind of far away. Why are you really so concerned about this? Well, you know, last time North and South Korea got into it, 26,000 Canadian soldiers joined the United Nations Command. It's the third largest contingent from overseas. 516 Canadians didn't return. Many of them are buried here in Korea at the United Nations Memorial Cemetery in Busan. Canada has the fourth largest Korean diaspora after China, US, and Japan. And we have a sizable population in Canada that is reminding our government of the importance of peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and internationally. And so we have a very strong interest here. And, you know, we're not going to be part of the six-party talks, obviously, but we very much want to be contributing. We very much want to be involved.
Thank you very much. We have 11 minutes left. I will ask point-blank questions to you, and then we will open the floor to the enthusiastic audience before us. Do you think, or do you expect, or do you hope that President Trump, with the full support of President Moon, will eventually, at the end of the day, succeed in making Kim Jong-un to forego his nuclear missile programs and bring about peace to the peninsula?
Point blank answer, I hope so.
Yes.
I hope so.
You hope so. Thank you.
If you allow me, I would reverse the question. I think the real question, the very question is, has the North Korean regime made a strategic choice for peace and security?
I hope so, and I believe so, given the fact that Kim Jong-un happens to be just 35. He has many more years to go to run his country. And, of course, depending on the conditions we make for him.
Well, certainly, in order to get it, we need a well-coordinated effort. Without such a very serious efforts, internationally, globally, I think that will not be attained.
Well, I think the other question is, can we afford not to succeed? What is the other option?
Good point.
Do we want to go through the motions of last April and last September again? So I think, as I said from the outset, for us, diplomacy is the main goal, and therefore we can not only wish, but also work that diplomacy succeeds. And I think that's basically the job description of all of us here.
Thank you.
Right. Well, if we didn't think there was a chance of success, we would not be in this process right now.
Well, thank you very much. As Ambassador Reiter said, we cannot afford not to succeed in this whole process. I'm now opening the floor to the audience. Any questions, comments from the floor? Oh, yes.
Don Kirk is my name. You know, North Korea hasn't used the N-word for nuclear.
Would you?
Okay.
Would you
Don
direct
Kirk
your
is my
question
name.
to a particular ambassador?
Well, I could ask
Okay?
anybody, but maybe Mr. Napper in particular. North Korea hasn't used the N-word for nuclear since the summit. And I wonder what actually is, if specifically, the next step to get them to do anything. You cited the fact that they've blown up this test site, but that was already destroyed. They haven't, I don't think, blown up the engineering site. I could be wrong about that. And returning those 3 hostages was really not all that key, considering that they were not held on any valid charges, and it was a sort of a gross violation to have arrested them in the first place. And there was no need for a cabinet secretary to go and pick them up. So I wonder what specific steps where do we go from here on this? When are they going to start using the N-word, and how are we going to get them to do it? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Well, I think, when you talk about that, I think we have to look at the actual text of the Singapore statement, which includes very clearly and has the signature of Kim Jong-un, a commitment to the complete denuclearization of North Korea. That plus the fact, and as we've heard from several of our panelists, that the Singapore statement has included within it a specific reference to the Panmunjom Declaration of April 27th, which also spells out very clearly what North Korea is prepared to do in terms of denuclearization and improving North-South relations. So rather than sort of worry about semantics and have they used this word or why didn't they use that word, let's look at what the actual text says. And yes, you're right. Frankly, have we had inspectors go into North Korea? No. Have we had a declaration from the North? Of course not. But that's to come. And over the next weeks and months, we're going to test the North's commitment to see if they truly are prepared to take the steps enshrined in these 2 very important documents from Singapore and from Panmunjom. Well, if I told you that, I wouldn't be a very good diplomat.
Well, thank you very much. I have a question to Ambassador Nepal, Mr. Cho, and or Ambassador Nagamine. After Singapore, President Trump is widely criticized for not having CVID in the joint agreement. I personally think that CD, complete denuclearization, includes I and V, but they don't think so. The Trump critics, they don't think so. And my question is the absence of CVID in the agreement a fatal defect that may delay or even derail North Korea's denuke, as the critics argue? Mr. Cho, would you start?
Well, CVID is a technical jargon, and the Singapore statement specifically mentioned complete denuclearization, which includes the concept of CVID. So in due course, the verification issue will come. Mm-hmm. So that's very self-explanatory. Thank you.
Yes, I totally agree with the Vice Minister. It's very easy, I think, for critics to be critical. I think it's very easy to get bogged down in semantics, but as Vice Minister Cho just said, and as Secretary Pompeo also said when he was here on June 14th, the idea of complete denuclearization has enshrined within it the idea that it must be verifiable and irreversible. Clearly, we won't know if it's complete until we've had a chance to check, until we've had a chance to verify compliance. And so, rather than worry about semantics in certain words, I think we have to see actions. We have to see concrete actions, and that's the task before us over the weeks and months ahead.
Ambassador Nagamine.
Yes, I have nothing to add to that. Actually, yes, as Mark said, through the negotiations, we need to have concrete actions taken by the North Korea. That's the final objective, of course, is a complete denuclearization, which is CVID, the target. So we need concrete actions from North Korea to that end.
Mm-hmm. We have 2 minutes. Yes. Oh, she first. I'll take 2 questions. First you and then you.
Hello, I'm Bin-La Chung from Yonhap News Agency in Korea. I have a question to Mr. Nagamine. North Korea is repeatedly saying that Japan should not meddle in the denuclearization process and the negotiations. And as you know, the North Korean diplomat said this again in Tuesday in Geneva at a UN-sponsored conference. So does Japan have a specific solution on this to bring up North Korea to the negotiation table or something? Does the Japanese government have a solution to bring up North Korea to the negotiation table with Japan?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, that the way that we will sort of consult, negotiate with North Korea, the basic position is stemming out of the 2002 joint document between Japan and North Korea. As I said, that at this moment we are using various channels for communicating with the North Korea. At this moment, I said there is no such arrangement for the summit on that kind of nature at this moment, but that is the situation I described earlier. I don't intend to comment on what the North Korean side is saying in the news media, but we are. Japan has been a very serious party of the denuclearization issues in the past. Japan was a party to six-party talks earlier on, and the security situation and peace in the region is something that Japan is very much taking part, and then we are one of the parties to those fundamental issues. So we keep that position going. With that, we will follow up of what we should do.
Yes, hello. I'm Veronica from Ewha Women's University, and my question is, leaders and many of us are quite optimistic about the process and how the North Korean is acting now. And I believe we should be, as Mr. Ritter stated, we cannot afford if we do not succeed. But what if the situation changes again, like many times in the history, North Korea turns its back again? So do you have any other plans or solutions on it if the process isn't going well in the future? Thanks. To all of gentlemen here.
Well, I think we have started with an optimistic notion, and I think we should keep the optimistic notion. Plan Bs are, of course, always helpful, but the best thing is to keep the Plan Bs where they are in the drawer, so that you only take them out when you need. But I think what I said, and I would like to repeat that, diplomacy is never a linear process. There will be setbacks. This is quite normal. And therefore I think we need this perseverance, and we will need leadership. We will have to overcome setbacks. And I think this is also one of the areas, in addition to what my French colleague already said, I think where a geographical distance perhaps can be helpful from the European side. We were already involved in nuclear de-escalation when the European Union was helping with Iran. We don't have these direct interests in Northeast Asia, That gives us a certain political distance, but at the same time, I think it's very important to understand that the security of Europe and Asia are intertwined. So it is a global affair, and therefore we have the global interest to be engaged. And the European Union also is engaged. We have 7 member states who have embassies in Pyongyang. The Swedish embassy, for example, is taking care also of US interest. So there's a very strong diplomatic presence and engagement. What we have done in the past, and if need be we can do it in the future, is to provide venues for meetings, for networkings, these famous conferences, what we call track 2 or track 1.5, to offer a platform for the continuation of talks should the official channels turn silent. But I think that's all a little bit of speculation, but there are instruments in the diplomatic toolbox which can support an ongoing process or which can be helpful in trying to get a process back to track in case it goes off the track.
No, she has the last question because our time is already up.
Hola. Good morning. Johanna Regalado from Iowa Women's University. My question is for Ambassador Knapper.
하나 더 해도 되겠어요? 하나 더 해도 되겠어요?
So this, since the breakdown of six-party talks in December 2008, the reality of the Pyongyang hasn't has its nuclear and missile capability, right? And that outcome served to illustrate that not only the failure of South Korea and U.S. policies toward to North Korea, but also the need of new approach. So in that sense, Seoul and Washington must take to take the active role of peacefully converting the current armistice regime into the peace regime. But how they can do it that? Or what about the new approach that, according to your experience, how can it be?
Well, just really briefly, and thank you for the question. Yes, clearly we've seen failures in the past, whether it was the agreed framework of 1994, six-party process of the late 90s, early 2000s. And I think we agree that a new approach was needed, and as Vice Minister Cho outlined, we have a new approach right now, which is it's very top-down, directly involving our leaders, whether it's President Moon, President Trump, Kim Jong-un himself, but the leaders meeting, establishing relationships of trust, and then hopefully reaching a point where our respective governments can then sit down, nail down details, and make progress from there based on the guidance, based on the spirit of what our leaders have sat down and agreed to amongst themselves.
Last question.
Good morning. My name is Nazira. I'm from Seoul National University, and I want to address my question to Vice Minister Cho and the Ambassador of Nepal, the United States charge in terms to the Republic of Korea. And since I'm a student and I'm learning, and I have some questions on the Singapore summit, was there any, was it actually diplomatic first from the side of the United States, actually to make some of those statements of the withdrawing the U.S. troops? Oh, it was actually discussed in advance. And from my perspective as the young student, I don't clearly understand this gesture. Was that really friendly? Since we actually now understand that there would be no anytime soon U.S. troops deployment, maybe there will be some little movement on U.S. sanctions, and there will be no movement as well on denuclearization as well. But my question is about was that really diplomatic then, and how was that discussed, and how was after that, before and after? Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. I guess just to make clear, during the meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump, not once did the subject of the presence or the posture of U.S. forces in South Korea come up. It's our very strong belief that any discussions regarding the deployment of U.S. forces here, the presence of U.S. forces here, that's a discussion between the United States and South Korea. That's not a discussion between the U.S. and North Korea. North Korea doesn't get a vote. But what we did hear about was, of course, the exercises between the U.S. and South Korea, and that's something we believe to generate a mood, an atmosphere of goodwill, to hopefully advance the nuclear discussions, that we've agreed to suspend those exercises, but we can restart them anytime should circumstances warrant it.
I just would like to add that the U.S.-Korea ally relationship is the bedrock of our security, and nothing has changed and nothing will change. And rest assured that it will remain so for the time being. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. To borrow the terminology of President Trump used in Singapore, this has been a very comprehensive and rich roundtable of key ambassadors in Seoul. And I thank you the active participation of the audience. And it was generally agreed here that we need to be optimists rather than pessimists. The latter cannot do anything. If you say Kim will never give up his nuclear programs, what can you do? Where can you go? So we have to start anyway based on this sort of optimism. And I thank you very much for your insightful contributions. And the whole idea of this roundtable is based on the thesis that in order for the peace process to get facilitated, as Mr. Cho stated, collective wisdom of international community is indispensable. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much.